with his speaking engagements, but we're very thankful that he has taken the time to be with us today, and we ask that the Holy Spirit will bless him. Thank you.
Good morning. We're going to try to get a PowerPoint up here. So our topic today is Bible prophecies from Harvard and Yale. And it's probably not what you think of when you hear the name Harvard and Yale. I was listening to a professor from Harvard. He was an expert on China. And he was telling how he would go to China on trips, gather information, and extremely wealthy families would invite him home for dinner. And he would eat a wonderful meal in a super nice house. And they would give him a tour of their house. And tell him all about their business, how wonderful they're doing. And then they would say, by the way, next year our son or daughter is graduating from high school. You think there's any way they could get into Harvard? When you go to Harvard, you're respected. Yale, same thing. And it's kind of interesting to me because China is a pretty much atheistic, communistic country, but Harvard still has appeal. If you look at the logo of Harvard or the shield, you'll see it says Veritas, and Yale has Veritas in there too. That's truth. So the logo of Harvard is truth. But for many years, Harvard's logo was to the glory of God, to the glory of Christ. And they came back to truth. You can see the 3 books there look like Bibles with that latch like the old Bibles have. Harvard has the same. Harvard's logo is light and truth. So with that in mind, I want to give a little example of how Bible prophecy can be confusing or clear. And after that, I want to kind of touch off where we left off last time. We were talking about Babylon. So we'll just kind of touch off where we were on Babylon, and then we'll get back to Harvard and Yale. So, trivia question. I described this mountain to you as carefully as I can. And I tell you, every single person in this room knows this mountain. Where is it? How does it look? You know, what's the deal? And you're wandering around the Sawtooth Mountains looking for this thing. And I tell you, it's going to be a famous mountain. And I describe everything about it. But there's a lot of mountains that kind of look like this, especially if you're reading about it in the Bible and it's one verse. You know, I mean, how do you know what it is? So, as it sits there, it's kind of difficult to really tell. But then you see a transformation starting. Washington, direct descendant of the Huguenots who were persecuted in France for being Christians. Cool. Maybe that's the mountain. But who's the next president going to be? Is there going to be another president? You're reading over that prophecy and you hear something weird like the first is going to be the first. The second is going to be the third. The third is going to be the 26th. and the fourth will be the 16th. This is mumbo jumbo. Doesn't make any sense. And you kind of look at that stuff and you're going, what does that mean? You know? And kind of another picture there of the carving. Our clicker's moving a little slow, I apologize. So now we got the 4 presidents up there. And it starts to click that the first president to be carved is the first president of America. The second one is the third president of America. The third president is the 26th. And you say, why? Why? And then the last one is the 16th. And so the gentleman that wanted to do this carving, he needed a lot of money because it's hundreds of people working on this thing. So he went to see Theodore Roosevelt and he started describing what he wanted to do, and he took out a paper and he started drawing. And he's drawing George Washington. And he's drawing Thomas Jefferson. And he starts drawing Theodore Roosevelt. And that's when Theodore Roosevelt said, yes, let's do it. When he saw his own picture up there. And so we read, I read this last time, I'm going to read it again. This is from Leroy Froome, who spent 20 years gathering everything he could find on the planet ever written about Bible prophecy. And they had a team of people translating it and into English. And this is what he writes. Prophecy has been progressively understood just as fast as history has fulfilled it, step by step, down through the passing centuries. And further, that always at the time of fulfillment of each major epoch and event of prophecy, there have been numerous men of eminence and godliness, widely scattered geographically, who have recognized that a fulfillment was taking place right before their eyes. They have sensed where they were on the timeline of prophecy and left the record of that recognition. Such is the evidence. And before I start on that, I want to remind everybody that Christ says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me. As the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I lay my life for the sheep. But I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. Then there will be one flock, one shepherd. And that's the day we look forward to. But in the meantime, we have God's people in all kinds of churches. And we don't want to forget that, especially in this particular presentation. So last time I was here, we talked about Babylon. Jeremiah and Isaiah prophesied that Babylon would never, it would be destroyed and never lived in again. And one of the prophecies here in Isaiah, and Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, the glory, the pride of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. A nomad will not pitch his tent there, and shepherds will not let their flocks rest there, but wild animals lie down there. Hyenas will howl in the fortresses, and jackals in the luxurious palaces. And so we looked last time at pictures of Babylon where King Nebuchadnezzar had attempted to rebuild and how his palace is sitting empty. And I skip one. And I'm sorry, this clicker is not really cooperating too well here. Go for one more. And you can look on YouTube. There's all kinds of videos of people visiting Babylon, and it looks like a wildlife preserve. I mean, there's just animals running around. There's nobody there. It's just like the Bible predicted. So this leads us to the question, come into Revelation 17:5, which is for the end of time. It talks about a beast, a cryptic beast. Riding on top of it is a woman. There's 7 heads. And the woman on her forehead is written, Babylon, the great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. And then we have our text that we read, John Alleman read, about we need to come out of Babylon. And how are you going to come out of Babylon if there's nobody there? Because obviously, the ancient city of Babylon, there's not a single soul living there. And God is talking about my people come out of Babylon. So now we got a problem. How does this work? And you're supposed to come out of her so you don't, not part of her sins. So we know that this Babylon in Revelation has 7 hills that the woman sits on. And one possibility is San Diego. It's built on 7 hills. Moscow is built on 7 hills. But the most celebrated city in the world, built on 7 hills, is Rome. So we'll take a little look at that. Babylon was the dominant warring power of its day. Rome was the dominant warring power in its day. Babylon conquered Israel. Centuries later, Rome also conquered Israel. Babylon destroyed the first Jerusalem temple. Rome destroyed the second Jerusalem temple. Each carried sacred vessels from the Jewish temple back to Babylon in the east and Rome in the west. Babylon completely destroyed the city of Jerusalem. Rome completely destroyed and devastated the city of Jerusalem. Babylon carried away surviving Jews into captivity. Rome carried away Jews into captivity. Rome was like Babylon, not just historically and militarily, but religiously, and also in their astrology and nature worship and various forms of paganism. And there is a book written on this topic called The Two Babylons, which talks about all the different pagan rituals and beliefs. And this author believes that, the mark, you get the mark of the beast from worshiping the image of the beast. He believes the image of the beast is the worship of Mary, because they had a mother and child that was back in the pagan religions that was being worshipped, and now this is a sanctified version of it. And so that's his belief, but he says, wisely enough, that it will only be proven if it is followed with a punishment. You don't worship it, you can't buy and sell. That will be the proof in his book. But nope, I'll skip one here, sorry. Then we come to another verse in 1 Peter 5. She who's in Babylon also sends you greetings, as does Mark, my son. We don't think there was anyone in Babylon. There definitely wasn't a church in Babylon. And so we look closely at this verse, and we see what people say. And I'm going to choose what some Catholic Bibles say about it, because if anyone didn't want to be referred to as Babylon, it would be the Catholics. And so Roman Catholic writer, late Cardinal Gibbons, Archbishop of Baltimore, Babylon, from which Peter addresses his first epistle, is understood by learned annotators, Protestant and Catholic alike, to refer to Rome. Catholic Bible, Douay version, makes this footnote, comment on the word Babylon in 1 Peter 5:13, figuratively, Rome. Another Catholic version, now it's talking about Revelation 14:8, Babylon in Jewish and Christian circles, Babylon was a symbol of Rome. So, oops, sorry about that. I'm skipping a few slides here. I don't know why. Now we come back to the beginning of America, a time when people were fleeing Europe. There was opportunity in America. There was also religious persecution in different parts of Europe. And we look at John Cotton, Puritan minister. He writes, "The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, which are the mountains of the city of Rome. It was built on 7 hills." Now we come to Yale. Timothy Dwight. Interesting character. He should be emulated by as many people as possible. He read the whole Bible while he was a child, began learning Latin at age 6. He'd come to school, and the older kids would go to recess. He went over and started reading their books, figure out how Latin worked. At age 8, he began reading Josephus and other religious history books that are quite heavy. They say he was ready for college at 8. But he entered Yale at age 13. Graduated with honors. He was a chaplain in the army, served 2 terms in the legislature, established a boys' school, and finally elected president of Yale in 1795 and remained until his death 21 years later. They say he read about 12 to 14 hours a day. He would eat hurried meals. He just couldn't get enough information fast enough into his brain. He was quite impressed when 1798 rolled around and the Pope was taken captive by Napoleon's general. This had a profound effect on him. At that time, different religious commentators were speculating when the 1260-year time period was going to end. And one of the things that you're going to notice if you look at people from Yale, people from Harvard, Princeton, all the different Protestant ministers that were writing about Bible prophecy, is they understood the day for a year principle. And they understood that the time of the end for the Catholic dominion over Europe was coming to an end very soon. And they were picking dates, and a lot of these guys were within 50 years of 1798. So when it happened, they were already expecting it. Another thing you will find out is these guys understood that Daniel and Revelation and 2 Thessalonians were all connected. And the same God that came to Daniel is the same God that came to John the Revelator. So Timothy writes regarding Babylon, writes, "From the angel interpreter we know that the 7 heads are the 7 mountains of Rome, the great city which at the time reigned with undivided empire over the kingdoms of the earth, and that the 10 horns are the 10 kingdoms into which that empire was finally divided." Which here we have the 10 countries Rome was divided into. The 7 on the left are still with us. The 3 on the right, we believe, are the 3 horns in Daniel 7 that were uprooted by the little horn, which is the Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths. They were Arian Christians that were not looked upon favorably by the Catholic Church. And Daniel 7:8 writes, "While I was watching the horns, suddenly a little one came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. There were eyes in this horn like a man's, and it had a mouth that spoke arrogantly." Oops. This thing's really jumping around on me, I'm sorry. So Daniel 7:24, "The 10 horns are 10 kings who will rise from the kingdom. Another, different from the previous ones, will rise after them and subdue 3 kings. He will speak words against the Most High. He will intend to change religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time," which is 3.5 years, which is the same as 42 months we have in Revelation. And anytime you have time prophecies that are written cryptically, not just straight years, Bible interpreters, both Harvard and Yale and other universities and other Protestants at that time, interpreted as day for a year, which is where they got the 1260 from. And they also saw that it was the 70 weeks, also worked out a day for a year. I'm going to buy you guys a new clicker next time I come. Sorry. Come down to Samuel Langdon, president of Harvard, 1774. Now, we live in America, right? Everybody's proud of the Constitution. We the people, all this kind of stuff. Let's look at who was involved in this. So the Puritans were heavily involved in negotiating for a government that had division of powers. So if you become a citizen in America and you moved here from another country, you've got to come and take a test and learn how we have divisions of powers and all this stuff. So we have Congress and Senate. We have the president. We have the Supreme Court. Everything kind of separated out, so one guy can't take over. And these Europeans had seen what the Pope had done in Europe and how he had basically run the whole place and had power over kings, and they said, we're doing it differently. So this gentleman, Samuel Langdon, in 1788, he was made a member of the New Hampshire Convention for ratifying the Constitution. And I believe he was also promoting the Constitution. President of the Academy of Arts and Sciences, he wrote on the two beasts, the rise and fall of Antichrist, the beast, the symbol of popery, the 1260 years. I mean, this guy could have preached a Seventh-day Adventist Daniel and Revelation seminar back then. That's what he was doing. He talked about the two women symbolizing the two churches, the pure church of God and the apostate church. Symbol of harlot and adultery. Throughout the Bible, the symbol of adultery, unfaithfulness, has been used when speaking of the church when it's gone astray and done what was wrong. Oops. I'll go back one here. And we see one example, there's many examples, in Ezekiel 23, for they have committed adultery and their blood is on their hands. They have committed adultery with their idols. And so one of the things these guys looked at is, okay, what's going on with the Catholic Church? They've changed a lot of laws. They've changed a lot of religious festivals, which is what Daniel 7 is talking about, the little horn would do. So they completely deleted the second commandment. Now, they didn't do this in their Bible. They did it in the catechisms, which is what the people are reading. So they deleted the second commandment because they are worshiping all these saints and what have you. Then they split the 10th commandment in two. So now you covet your neighbor's stuff and you covet your neighbor's wife. Now they got 2 commandments, they're back to 10. Then they modified the 4th commandment, and I'm going to read from a catechism. Question, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Answer, we observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church and the Council of Laodicea transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. And in case you don't believe this, I could have made it up. If you want to see afterwards, I have a catechism right here that goes even in more depth about how they changed it. And I just skipped one of them, but that's okay. A few other things they've changed is idolatry of saints, worship of Mary, tradition over the Bible, infant baptism, confession of sins to a priest, the priesthood and celibacy, forgiveness of sins by mediator priests, purgatory, reduced time in purgatory by paying money or climbing stairs on your knees, infallibility of the Pope, and a whole bunch of other things we have not mentioned. So this is pretty serious stuff. I mean, we got an Old Testament book talking about the Antichrist church. We got New Testament book talking about the Antichrist church, and we got Thessalonians in the middle there too. What do you do with this stuff? So, what do you expect a Harvard graduate to do with it? So we come to Paul Dudley. He did something. His father and grandfather had been governors of Massachusetts. His father was involved in redistributing Huguenots from France into Massachusetts. And he had special land allotted for them that he got permission from England because, they were still colonies at this point. So he became, the father of Paul Dudley, he became interested in prophecy. And I've skipped so many people from that time that are very prominent people, but one of them is a family by the name of Mathers. And I think one of them was also involved in Harvard. But Increase Mathers, he was quite a writer, and he was persuading people, and he influenced Paul Dudley's father tremendously in Bible prophecy. So Paul comes along, graduates from Harvard, goes back to England, gets a law degree. He's put in as Attorney General in the province of Massachusetts, an elected member of the legislature. And he's promoted to the Superior Court bench and was made Chief Justice of Massachusetts in 1745. Now notice this guy passed away before 1798, which is critical time in this whole prophecy. But even though he passed away before that, he had a lot of foresight. Oop, back up here. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry, this thing is really giving me a fun time. So Paul gets very concerned that people don't understand how dangerous the Antichrist power is. And he starts telling people this is very significant that we understand who the beast in Revelation is, because if you worship the image of the beast, you're going to get the mark of the beast. So if you know who it is, you can at least avoid that. And at one point, there was some Protestants that wanted to make a union with the Catholics. And he had a talk in the chapel at Harvard persuading them not to, saying, this is the beast of Revelation, the little horn in Daniel 7, and you should stay away from them. And long before, he had written an anonymous pamphlet entitled An Essay on the Merchandise of Slaves and Souls of Men, with an application thereof to the Church of Rome. And later, when it was reprinted, people tried to get rid of the Church of Rome part, but in the early copies, it was on there. So he passes away, and his will, he left money for a continuing lectureship. Its purpose, as fully defined, was to provide for an annual discourse on various aspects of religion, the third in each 4-year cycle, to deal with the doctrines and practices of the Church of Rome. So he leaves money to Harvard so they can talk about the Church of Rome. These were initiated largely because of certain profound conclusions he had reached on perils confronting America, perils which would come because of a failure to see the prophetic significance of the papacy. The third lecture, so they run in 4 years at a time, every third year, the third lecture to be for the detecting and convincing and exposing the idolatry of the Romish Church, their tyranny, usurpations, damnable heresies, fatal errors, abominable superstitions, and other crying wickednesses in their high places. And finally, that the Church of Rome is that mystical Babylon, that man of sin, the apostate church spoken of in the New Testament. So here we have some of the founding fathers of America, and this is what they're worried about. 5 of the first lectures. Now, we have a Harvard president initiating the lectures. We have a future president being one of the speakers of Harvard. But look at the topics: infallibility, the supremacy of the Bishop of Rome, popish idolatry, popery, a complexity of falsehoods, the Church of Rome, the man of sin. Pretty strong stuff. The lectures went from 1755 to 1857. The early presentations frequently applied the symbols of prophecy to the papacy, but a definite change in tone and treatment marks the transition of the years, the interest of the founder being increasingly forgotten. A break in the lectures took place from 1857 to 1887 in order that funds could be increased. Then something happens. There appears an interesting entry for 1890 to 91. Listing John Keene as lecturer on revealed religion, delivered in Harvard University Chapel. This being none other than the Roman Catholic Bishop of the Catholic University of America. Then in May 1891, 58 members of the Harvard faculty petitioned the university to suppress the third Dudleyan lecture of the cycle or abolish the whole series if necessary. The problem was a suppression of one of the lectures would be a breach of trust, which might amount to a renunciation of the whole trust. In other words, they're going to lose all the money they got from him. Nevertheless, in 1910, the third lecture was suppressed, and eventually the lectures came to an end in 1928. So, Harvard was the first university in America. It started off as a religious university with about 40% of its graduates graduating as ministers. And the ministers of that day had a much more prominent role in society than they do now. So it was a different time and a different place. I understand that. But nevertheless, the people that were there, you always wonder who were the wise men that found Jesus in the manger, if he was, Who were they? How did they, what kind of people were these? And I think they were probably godly people like some of the people at Harvard and Yale back in the day. And the gentleman at Yale, when he took over Yale, Timothy Dwight, there was one professing Christian in the freshman class. And there was virtually no attendance at the university church. So here you got a guy who's been reading religious literature since he was a kid. He knows the Bible back and forth. He takes over as president of Yale University, and the place is dead spiritually. And so he starts writing pamphlets. He makes himself a professor of religion, and he just goes at it wholeheartedly. And in 1802, 1/3 of Yale got converted. And attendance at the university church was running between 25 and 50% of the population of Yale student body. That's the difference one man had in an institution. But as you read all these different guys, some of them start to vary a little bit. So in Revelation, we have the 7 heads are 7 hills. But it also says there's 7 kings. So if you read all these different guys, they all agree that the 7 hills is Rome. Now the 7 kings start getting different. Some of them believe it's the 7 countries in Europe after the 3 were uprooted. Some are believing it's bishops and cardinals and all these other different classifications. Starts to get a little bit, variance there. But as far as papacy being the little horn Daniel 7, straight across the board, pretty much all the Protestants in America, including, I think is it Roger Williams that founded Rhode Island. He was the first Baptist pastor in America, and the Purists didn't like him because he wasn't a Purist, and so they ran him out of town. And he went up to Rhode Island, and then he took a boat back to England and got a charter for Rhode Island. And religious liberty is what his big thing was. Quakers moved there because they were being persecuted by the Puritans. So there's a little bit of strictness that came along with these high religious values. The other thing we run across is, what do we do with this information? We recognize that the Catholic Church is the Antichrist power. They're the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians 2. They're the Babylonian element of the beast of Revelation. What are you going to do with that information? Maybe get a good job in the U.S. military and drop a nuke right on top of the Vatican? Is that what we're going to do? We're going to murder the Pope next time he comes to America? I mean, what does the Bible say we should do? It says none of that. It says God's people are in that church, and God is inviting them out. And you see that especially today. There's an increased amount of Catholics that are feeling disenchanted with the direction that church is going. And we want to invite every one of those people back to God's Word. They need to know that God is calling them out back to His true teaching. And we are not called for any kind of violence against that church. That's what they used. The Catholic Church used violence on Protestants. Puritans started getting a little bit violent against Catholics in the early days. Not what we're called to do. But we simply need to stay true to God, and it will become more and more obvious to God-fearing people that they are in the wrong church and they need to switch over to the right church. And you can see just in the last week how the Pope is insulting conservative Americans openly. And I think a lot of God's people in the Catholic Church are going to be coming our way soon. But that's my conclusion for today. And I think we have a closing hymn we're going to go. Oh, I'm done for today.
When was the deadly wound healed?
What's that?
When was the deadly wound healed?
The deadly wound of the horn in Daniel 7 is got to be as close to being completely healed as possible right now. Now, some people believe the healing took place in one shot, and a major part of that was in 1928 when Mussolini gave the Papal States back and gave them power back, and then Reagan. But that's only one thing. I mean, Reagan, many years later, sent diplomats, accepted diplomats. Now we have 183 countries that the Vatican is sending diplomats to. I mean, this wound is, they have as much power as they've ever had. And they've got as much influence as they've ever had. So that hopefully that answers your question.
When did America bow the knee to Rome?
No, I think we're kind of in the process of that right now. But shall we have the closing hymn?